My daughter came to see me with a huge bruise on her arm after having lunch with her husband. I asked her, "What happened?" She forced a smile and said, "I just tripped on the sidewalk." I immediately called my son-in-law. He answered, "So what? Yeah, I hit her. What do you think you're going to do about it?" I hung up without saying a word. A little while later, I made a single phone call. The next morning, he was the one calling me. "Do you have a death wish or something?" "I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, hit like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my revenge story from. I want to know how far it's traveled." The afternoon sun was setting over Santa Fe, slipping through the old wooden frame of my artisan shop, lighting up the skeins of bright red, yellow, and blue yarn that I had spent all morning carefully arranging. At 65 years old, I was used to this light, to the smell of beeswax from the hand-woven rugs, to the sharp cry of the tamale seller in the market outside. I was carefully folding an embroidered napkin when the silhouette of Sarah, my daughter, appeared in the doorway. Sarah came in, her thin shoulders trembling slightly, though she tried to force a smile. She was wearing a long-sleeved white blouse, the kind she never wore because she said they made her too hot. I looked up, about to ask her why she came so early, but I stopped short. When Sarah put her cloth bag on the table, her sleeve accidentally rode up, revealing a dark, ugly bruise like ink spilled on the pale skin of her wrist. My heart sank as if someone was squeezing it. That bruise didn't look like it was from a fall or an accident. It was marked deep, cruel, like the print of someone's hand on my daughter's flesh. "What is it, sweetie?" I asked, my voice trembling even though I tried to stay calm. Sarah quickly pulled her sleeve down, hiding the bruise, and then smiled crookedly in that way I knew meant she was hiding something from me. "It's nothing, Mom. I just tripped on the sidewalk." Her voice was soft, but her eyes avoided mine. I wanted to insist, to take her hand, to lift her sleeve to see if there were more marks, but I just stood there frozen. Something inside me stopped me, as if I was afraid that if I asked more, the truth would come out and I wasn't ready to face it. Silently, I pulled a chair over for her. "Sit down, honey. I'll get you some lemonade." I went to the kitchen, holding the pitcher with my heart in a knot. She had been my greatest joy, the daughter with a smile as bright as the morning sun, who always told me her big dreams of having a happy family. Now she was sitting there, thin, quiet, like a shadow of her former self. I put the glass of lemonade in front of Sarah, trying to manage a smile, but my eyes couldn't leave her arm, even though it was covered again. Suddenly, Leo, my 8-year-old grandson, ran into the shop and hugged my legs. "Grandma." Today, the teacher said my drawing was the best in the class. The boy chattered, on his bright eyes shining. I bent down, stroked his head, and felt my heart warm a little with that innocent smile. Leo was my whole world, the reason I still got up every morning, why I kept weaving rugs, why I kept living after my husband was gone. But not even Leo's smile could chase away the unease in my chest. I glanced at Sarah and saw her with her head down, fidgeting with the edge of her glass, as if trying to hide a secret. When Sarah got up to go to the kitchen for some sweet bread, I called Leo over and kept him close. I lowered my voice and asked him gently, "Was your dad angry today, my boy?" As soon as the question was out, I regretted it. Leo's bright eyes froze for a moment, and then he looked down at his worn-out little shoes. He didn't say anything. He just ran silently to a corner of the shop where I kept some old toys. My heart felt another squeeze. An 8-year-old boy doesn't know how to lie, and his silence was more terrifying than any word. I stood there, my hands gripping the edge of the table, trying not to shake. Sarah and her son stayed a little longer, and then she said she had to go back to Albuquerque to make dinner. I walked them to the corner, watching Leo take his mom's hand, hopping on the cobblestones. Sarah turned around and gave me a hug, but it was a cold hug, as if she was trying to keep her distance. When their figures disappeared around the corner, I went back to the shop, closed the door, and sat alone in the growing darkness. The colorful skeins of yarn now looked blurry, just like my mind at that moment. I didn't want to believe it, but I knew. The bruise on Sarah's arm wasn't from a fall, and Leo's silence was the confirmation I never wanted to hear. That night, I sat at the small dining table in my humble house, the yellowish light illuminating the peeling wall. I picked up the phone, my finger hesitating over the screen. Finally, I took a deep breath and dialed the number of Mark, the son-in-law I once trusted, to make my daughter happy. The phone rang 3 times, and then his voice boomed, polished and arrogant. "Mrs. Ramirez, what can I do for you?" I didn't beat around the bush. I got straight to the point. "What did you do to Sarah?" My voice sounded firmer than I expected, but inside my heart was pounding. There was a second of silence on the other end of the line, and then a mocking laugh as cold as a knife. "So what? Of course I hit her. And what are you going to do about it?" He said, each word a slap in the face. I wanted to scream at him, but I just hung up my hand, shaking with rage. I didn't want him to hear my voice break. I didn't want him to know how weak I felt. I got up, left my house, and went to Mrs. Davis's, my neighbor and friend for so many years. I pretended I needed to borrow some cornmeal, but really I just wanted to find someone to share the anguish that was choking me. As soon as she saw me, Mrs. Davis let me into her kitchen, her eyes full of concern. "I saw young Sarah crying alone outside the door this afternoon, Linda," she whispered, her voice as shaky as mine. "I called for her to come in, but she just shook her head and left." Her words were like adding more fuel to the fire burning inside me. I thanked her, took the bag of flowers she gave me, and went home, each step feeling as heavy as if I were carrying stones. In my small room, I lit a candle in front of the portrait of my husband Michael, who had left me 10 years ago. His black and white photo was still there on the small altar, his kind eyes looking at me. "Michael, if you were here, what would you do?" I whispered as tears rolled silently down my cheeks. I prayed not for myself, but for Sarah, for Leo, and for myself to have the strength to face whatever was coming. The candle flame flickered its weak light, illuminating his face, as if he were answering me with his silence. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sun hadn't yet bathed the cobblestone street of Santa Fe, but I was already in front of the mirror, smoothing my gray hair, tying my shawl tightly around my shoulders. I wanted to look strong, not for me, but for Sarah. She was standing in a corner of the room in her long-sleeved blouse, her eyes red but trying to smile. "Mom, you don't have to make a scene about this," she said in a little voice that seemed to beg me to stop. But I just shook my head and took her hand. "Come with me, Sarah. We can't let this go on." Inside me, a fire was smoldering, not of anger, but of love for my daughter, a love that nothing could extinguish. We walked into the police station in the center of town, where the smell of burnt coffee mixed with the squeak of a ceiling fan. Sarah walked behind me, head down, eyes fixed on the old tiled floor, as if she wanted to become invisible. I took her straight to the desk of Detective Miller, a man I'd known since my husband was alive. Back then, he'd come to our house for dinner laughing and chatting, and he even praised my cooking. But now, seeing the way he sat with one foot on his desk, looking at us like we were 2 strangers, I knew things wouldn't be easy. "Detective Miller," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I'm here about my daughter. Her husband hits her. I want to file a report." I told him everything from the bruise on her wrist to the phone call the night before when Mark admitted his behavior with complete shamelessness. I looked Miller straight in the eye, hoping for a little justice, a little empathy from the man who once ate at my table. But he just glanced at Sarah and then leaned over to scribble something superficially, the pencil scratching the paper. "She probably fell down the stairs, a domestic accident, you know." He let out his voice as cold as if he were talking about the weather. My blood boiled. I slammed my hand on the table, the sound making the whole room go quiet. "No, my daughter is beaten by her husband. Do you hear me? This is not an accident." My voice trembled, not with fear, but with the rage that was exploding in my chest. Miller raised his head and smiled with disdain, a smile I wanted to slap off his face. "Look, Mrs. Ramirez, I advise you to go home and tell your daughter to keep her family business quiet. We don't get involved in fights between a husband and wife." His words were like a stab to the heart. I wanted to scream at him, to ask him where his conscience was when he saw a mother begging for help, but Sarah pulled on my arm. "Mom, let's just go." Her voice broke. Her eyes filled with tears, as if she was afraid that if I made a scene, things would get worse. I squeezed her hand, my heart heavy as a stone, and led her silently out of the station. Every step felt like I was sinking deeper into helplessness. On the way back, I couldn't bear the feeling of failure that was choking me. I decided to stop by the office of Mr. Stevens, a well-known attorney in Santa Fe. I had heard he was sharp, that he had helped many people win important cases. If the police couldn't help, I hoped the law would be on my daughter's side. Stevens's office was in a new building with pristine white walls and gleaming glass doors. When we entered, the smell of expensive cologne and the hum of the air conditioning made me feel out of place. Me, an old woman who sold crafts, standing in the middle of a place where money and power reigned. I told him the whole story, from the bruise on Sarah's arm to Mark's brazen attitude. Stevens sat across from me, leaning back in his leather chair, slowly turning a gold ring on his finger, as if my story were just a piece of gossip. When I finished, he looked at me. Then he looked at Sarah with a cold gaze, as if he were weighing something. "Linda," he said slowly, "you have to understand that Mark has connections we don't want to mess with. If this becomes a scandal, the ones who will suffer the most will be Sarah and little Leo." His words were another slap, but this time it not only hurt, it made me feel small, powerless against the wall of power that Mark had built. Sarah sat next to me, her head bowed, her hands clasped tightly. I saw her shoulders tremble as if she were holding back tears. I wanted to hug her to tell her I wouldn't give up, but a lump formed in my throat. I had Sarah stand up, didn't say another word, and we left the office in a suffocating silence. Outside, the scorching midday sun of Santa Fe burned, but it was nothing compared to the fire of disappointment that burned inside me. That afternoon, I decided to go with Sarah to her house in Albuquerque. I wanted to see with my own eyes where my daughter lived, to understand why she insisted on hiding the truth from me. Sarah's house was on the outskirts, a large house that Mark had built with money from his construction company. But when we entered the yard, the air was so heavy I could barely breathe. Beatrice Carter Mark's mother was sitting in a wicker chair under the shade of an avocado tree, with a glass of juice in her hand and the expression of an arrogant queen. As soon as she saw us, she glared at us and said in a sharp voice, "Your daughter is good for nothing but living off my family. She can't even handle meals for her husband and son." Her words were like a knife in my heart. I wanted to talk back, to tell her it was her son who was destroying this family, but Sarah squeezed my arm tightly, her teary eyes begging, "Mom, please don't." She hugged Leo tightly, who hid behind her, looking at his grandmother with bewildered eyes. I saw the fear in that look, and it hurt my soul. Just then, Mark came out of the house, adjusting his tie nonchalantly, as if everything were normal. He looked at me with cold, challenging eyes, then turned to Sarah and ordered, "Get in the house. Don't let your mother make a scene." I wanted to scream in his face, to ask him why he treated my daughter like that, but Sarah's pleading look stopped me. I turned and left my steps heavy on the stone path. Behind me, Beatrice's voice still echoed, full of contempt. "An old woman who sells rags isn't going to come here and give lessons to the Carter family." Her words were the final stab cutting deep into my pride. That night I returned to my small room in Santa Fe. I sat in front of my husband's portrait, the candle flame flickering on his face. "Michael, you used to say that justice always finds a way," I whispered as tears rolled down my cheeks. "But where is the justice now? The police won't help the lawyers turn their backs on us. Our daughter is suffering, and I can't do anything." I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my skin. I knew one thing for sure: the justice Sarah needed would never be found in this corrupt system where Mark's money and power overshadowed everything. The next morning, the early sun in Santa Fe was as gentle as ever, but my heart was not. I stood in front of the shop, rearranging the skeins of yarn, trying to keep my hands busy so my mind wouldn't sink into dark thoughts. Sarah arrived early with Leo, who was jumping up and down, hugging a stained drawing pad. "Mom, can you watch the kid for a bit? I'm going to the market in Albuquerque to buy a few things," Sarah said, trying to sound normal, but her eyes avoided mine. I nodded, hugged Leo, and forced a smile. "Be careful, honey," I told her, though I knew perfectly well she wasn't just going to the market. There was something in the way Sarah lowered her head, in how she put on the long-sleeved blouse, despite the heat that squeezed my heart. After Sarah left, I brought Leo inside the shop and sat him at a corner of the table with some colored pencils. I started displaying the newly woven rugs at the entrance. The familiar smell of cotton and beeswax calmed me a little. Suddenly, Leo ran to me, pulled on my arm, and said excitedly, "Grandma, look what I drew." He showed me a scribbled drawing of a house, an avocado tree, and a woman. But then the world stood still. Right on the arm of the woman in the drawing, I saw black smudges. I asked Leo with a trembling voice, "Who did you draw?" Leo smiled innocently. "I drew my mommy. She has purple spots like this all over her body." I took the drawing, trembling, turned back to Leo and tried to keep my voice soft. "Leo, what a beautiful drawing. But tell me, does your mommy's arm hurt?" The boy looked at me bewildered. His bright eyes suddenly darkened. He didn't answer, just nodded very slightly, fidgeting with a colored pencil in his hand. His silence was like a stab sharper than any word. I hugged Leo, pulling him close, trying to hide the trembling that was running through my body. "Come on, let's get you some lemonade," I said, just to get him out of that moment so I wouldn't break down in front of him. I went to the kitchen and took a bottle of herbal oil that I used to make myself since my husband was alive. Every time Leo fell, I used it to soothe him, but today that bottle was for Sarah. When she came back from the market, I took her to a corner of the shop where the light wasn't as bright. "Sit here, honey," I said with a shaky voice. Sarah looked at me with eyes full of worry, but she obeyed. I gently rolled up her sleeve, though she tried to resist. The bruise was still there, not just one more visible in the daylight, like an irrefutable accusation. "This isn't from a fall, Sarah," I said, my voice breaking. "Tell me the truth, please." Sarah quickly pulled her sleeve down, her eyes watery. "Mom, I'm begging you, don't make a scene," she whispered, her voice cracking. "If I speak up, he'll take Leo from me. I can't lose him, Mom." Her words were a blow to the chest. I wanted to scream. I wanted to go to Mark's house that very instant and confront him. But Sarah's pleading look stopped me. She burst into tears, her thin shoulders shaking uncontrollably, as if everything she had been holding back for so long was overflowing. I hugged her, letting her lean on my shoulder, her tears soaking my blouse. "I'm not going to let him hurt you anymore," I whispered, though I myself didn't know what I was going to do. I took the bottle of herbal oil and gently applied it to the bruise. The smell of mint and marigold filled the air, but it didn't ease the pain in my heart. Every time I touched the bruise, I felt my daughter's pain, not just on her skin, but deep in her soul. Sarah stayed there crying silently, and I could only hold her tighter, as if by doing so I could protect her from the whole world. Just then, Mrs. Davis, my neighbor, came into the shop with her market basket. She looked at Sarah, then at me, with an expression of compassion. "It's because of that Mark again, isn't it?" she asked in a low voice, as if afraid someone would hear her. "I heard them arguing very loudly last night. You could hear it from across the street." Sarah quickly looked down, wiped her tears, and stood up, saying quickly, "I have to go now, Mom." She practically ran out of the shop, as if afraid to face the truth Mrs. Davis had just revealed. I walked her to the corner, watching her thin figure disappear, my heart in a knot. I wanted to stop her, to tell her not to go back to that house, but I knew she wouldn't listen. She was afraid of losing Leo, and that fear was bigger than her own pain. That evening, as I was tidying up the shop, arranging the last rugs, the blinding lights of a vehicle lit up the interior. A screech of tires, and I immediately recognized Mark's familiar black truck. He didn't get out, just rolled down the window and gave me a cold, defiant look. His eyes seemed to say, "You can't do anything to me." Then he sped off. The truck disappeared at high speed, leaving a strong smell of exhaust and a silent threat. I stood frozen in the doorway of the shop, my hands gripping the edge of a table, feeling a rage I had never experienced before. He was reminding me that everything was still under his control, that I, an old woman who sold crafts, was nothing against his power. After that day at the police station and at the lawyer's office, I felt as if the whole world had turned its back on me. Detective Miller with his mocking smile, the lawyer Mr. Stevens with his gleaming gold ring, they were all on Mark's side, or rather on the side of his money and his power. I sat in my artisan shop looking at the colorful skeins of yarn with an empty heart. I had hoped the law would protect Sarah, but now I knew that the official path was closed, like a heavy iron door bolted shut in front of me. That morning, I decided to confront Mark myself. I didn't say anything to Sarah. I didn't want to worry her anymore. I tied my dark blue shawl, grabbed my cloth bag, and took the first bus to Albuquerque. The whole way I watched the agave fields pass by the window, but my mind was only on Sarah, the bruise on her arm, the scared look in Leo's eyes. I told myself that even if I was just an old woman who sold crafts, I wouldn't let Mark continue to trample on my daughter's dignity. Mark's office was in downtown Albuquerque, a new building with gleaming glass as if showing off its owner's wealth. The sign Carter Construction shone under the sun with golden letters, like a declaration of power. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open. Inside, the cold air from the air conditioning made me shiver. The secretary, a young woman with her hair in a high bun, looked at me curiously. I said dryly, "I'm Sarah's mother. I want to see Mark." She hesitated for a moment, but still led me to the second floor, as if she knew I wouldn't leave easily. The office door opened, and I saw Mark leaning back in his expensive leather chair with one foot on the polished wooden desk. He was laughing out loud on the phone, his voice echoing through the office. When he saw me, he motioned for the person on the other end of the line to wait and then hung up without wiping the smile from his face. "Linda, what a surprise," he said in a sweet but sarcastic tone. "What brings you here? Want to buy a plot of land to build on?" He let out a laugh as if my presence were a joke. I stood tall, looking him straight in the eye, trying to keep my voice from trembling. "You hit Sarah. I saw the bruises. How long are you going to deny your responsibility?" My words came out clear and cold, but inside I felt like I was facing a wild beast. Mark didn't answer right away. He got up calmly, poured himself a glass of tequila from a bottle on his desk, and took a sip without taking his eyes off me. "And what if I admit it?" he said with a shameless tone. "What are you going to do to me? Miller is my guy. So is Stevens. Do you believe me, Linda? In this town, nobody dares to touch me." His words were a blow to the chest. I clenched my hands, my nails digging into my palms, trying not to shake with rage. "You're destroying my daughter's family," I said, my voice breaking not from fear, but because I could clearly see my powerlessness against him. Mark leaned back in his chair, raising an eyebrow with a provocative smile. "Family," he said, drawing out the word as if mocking it. "I control this family. Sarah is nothing more than an ornament in the house. And you, an old woman who sells crafts, what could you possibly do to me?" That phrase was like a knife to my pride. I wanted to scream, to grab him by the collar of his shirt and shout in his face that Sarah was my daughter, a human being, not an object for him to abuse. But I stood there with a lump in my throat and could only say one thing, slowly but firmly. "One day, you're going to pay for what you've done, Mark." He let out a laugh that echoed in the room and then slammed the table as if he were watching a comedy. "I'll be waiting, mother-in-law," he said, his voice full of sarcasm. "Let's see what an old woman who sells souvenirs can do to me." I turned and left, feeling his contemptuous gaze on my back. Every step out of that office felt a little heavier, as if I were carrying the weight of Sarah's pain and my own helplessness. When I left, the scorching midday sun of Albuquerque burned my skin, but it was nothing compared to the fire of anger and disappointment that burned inside me. I stood on the sidewalk watching people pass by trucks full of goods street vendors, calling out under the shade of the trees. Everything was going on as normal, as if no one knew that my daughter was living in a hell, that I had just been humiliated by the same man who had destroyed her happiness. Returning from Mark's office, I felt as if all my energy had been drained. The bus ride from Albuquerque to Santa Fe seemed longer than ever, each turn of the wheels sinking me deeper into helplessness. When I opened the door to my house, the small room was already in shadow. Only the faint light of the candle on the altar for my husband Michael remained. Sarah and Leo were fast asleep in the other room, the boys' rhythmic breathing reminding me that I still had a reason to fight. But at that moment, I just wanted to sit down and let the exhaustion consume me. I dragged the old wooden chair and sat in front of Michael's portrait, looking at his kind eyes in the black and white photo that had already turned yellow. "Linda, in this life, sometimes you have to take justice into your own hands." His old words echoed in my head, as clear as if he were sitting next to me. I opened the old wooden drawer where I kept Michael's memories. Among the old letters and a faded family photo, I found a yellowed piece of paper with the writing almost faded. It was the phone number of Frank Thompson, an old friend of Michael's, whom he had helped get out of an unjust trial more than 20 years ago. Frank had been a cop, a tough but fair man, and now he had his own law firm in Santa Fe. I took the paper, my trembling fingers tracing the numbers. I hadn't spoken to him in years, but in my heart, I knew that if anyone could help me now, it could only be Frank. My heart pounded as I dialed. The phone rang 3 times, each ring seeming like an eternity. Then a deep, raspy voice answered, "Who is this?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice from breaking. "It's me, Linda Ramirez." I said concisely but firmly, "My daughter is being abused by her husband. I need your help." There was a long silence, as if Frank was weighing something. Finally, he spoke, his tone serious and grave. "You know this isn't easy, but if you dared to call, I'll listen. I'll see you at the cafe near the Santa Fe market tomorrow at 8 in the morning." I hung up my hand, still shaking, but with a weight lifted from my soul as if a burden had been removed. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. I couldn't sleep that night. The distant bark of a dog, the loud band music from a nearby cantina, everything seemed to stir the confused thoughts in my head. I sat at my embroidery table, trying to finish a napkin, but I pricked my finger with the needle and felt no pain. Each stitch was a reminder of Sarah, of the dark bruise on her arm, of Leo's scared look. I thought of Mark, of his mocking laughter, calling me an old woman who sells souvenirs. He thought I was weak, powerless, but he didn't know how strong a mother can be when she's cornered. The next morning I got up early and took Leo to school. The boy held my hand, chattering about the drawing he had made the day before, but I just smiled, my heart heavy. When I got home, I asked Sarah to take care of the shop. "I'm going to buy new fabric," I lied, not wanting her to know what I was about to do. Sarah nodded, but her eyes were full of worry, as if she sensed something. I put on my dark blue shawl, took my cloth bag, and walked to the small cafe on a corner of the Santa Fe market. The smell of roasted coffee and fresh bread filled the air, but I wasn't hungry. I just wanted to see Frank. I wanted to hear him say that there was still a way to save my daughter. Frank was already waiting in a corner of the cafe, wearing a dark jacket with a steaming cup of spiced coffee in front of him. He had aged a lot since the last time I saw him. His hair was almost completely white, but his gaze was still sharp, as if nothing could escape him. When he saw me, he nodded and motioned for me to sit. "Tell me everything, Linda," he said, his voice deep but warm. "Don't hide anything from me." I poured out my heart, every word tearing at my soul. I told him about the bruises on Sarah's arm, how she tried to hide them under long sleeves. I told him about Leo's silence, his scared look when I asked about his father. I told him about the call to Mark, his mocking laughter, his shameless challenge that I could do nothing to him. I told him about Detective Miller, who once ate at my house, but now turned his back on me, and about the lawyer Stevens with his threats that messing with Mark would harm Sarah and Leo. Finally, I told him about the confrontation in Mark's office, how he called Sarah an ornament and humiliated me as if I were worthless. Tears rolled down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. I wanted Frank to see my pain, my desperation. Frank listened in silence, nodding, turning the coffee cup on the table. He didn't interrupt me, just listened. His eyes narrowed as if analyzing every detail. When I finished, he looked at me for a long moment and then said in a grave voice, "I owe Michael a favor. Back then, if it weren't for him, I would have lost everything. It's time to pay that debt." He paused. His gaze turned colder. "But this path won't be easy, Linda. Mark isn't just an abuser. He has money, power, and a whole network that protects him. Are you ready?" I didn't answer right away. I held the hot coffee cup in my hands, feeling the heat spread through my cold fingers. That was my answer. A week after our meeting at the cafe, I lived in a state of constant tension. Every morning I opened the shop. I arranged the skeins of yarn. I smiled at customers, but my mind was elsewhere. I was waiting for Frank. I was waiting for a sign that he had found a way to expose Mark. Every time the phone rang, my heart skipped a beat thinking it was him. But the days passed in silence, and I began to fear that I had placed my hopes on something impossible. Every night I sat before Michael's altar, lit a candle, and whispered to him, asking for strength to continue. "Michael, am I doing the right thing?" I would ask, but only the flickering flame answered me. Then, one afternoon, as the golden light streamed through the shop door, Frank appeared. He came in with a thick, old leather briefcase in his hand, his face more serious than usual. "Linda, we need to talk," he said, his voice low but firm. I took him to the small back room where I used to sit and embroider on my sleepless nights. Sarah was at the counter laughing with a customer, completely oblivious to everything. I closed the door, my heart pounding as if I were about to enter a battle I didn't know if I could win. Frank put the briefcase on the wooden table, opened it, and spread thick files before me. I looked at the pages, the numbers, the scribbled signatures, and felt my head spin. He pointed to each document, explaining slowly, "These are copies of the construction contracts from Mark's company. See, the figures are blatantly falsified, the price of materials inflated to double, triple to steel." He moved to another stack of papers, bank receipts with bright red stamps. "This is proof that he launders money through a charitable foundation in his mother's name, Beatrice. The dirty money goes through there and then back into his pocket." Finally, he handed me a stack of invoices with a handwriting that chilled me to the bone. "Protection guarantee, Detective Miller." I took each paper, my hands shaking. Those numbers, those signatures, those notes, they were like knives, not just cutting my heart, but revealing the disgusting truth about Mark. He wasn't just a violent man who beat his wife, but the center of a small, dirty network of corruption. Frank looked at me, his eyes narrowed, and lowered his voice. "As you can see, Linda, he doesn't just harm Sarah. He's part of a whole rotten system. To bring him down, we have to target the whole system." I nodded, but a lump formed in my throat, and I couldn't speak. I thought of Sarah, of the dark bruises on her arm, of Leo's frightened gaze. These papers weren't just evidence. They were a hope, the hope of being able to get my daughter out of the hell Mark had created. But just then, Sarah's voice came from the front. "Mom, a customer wants a rug." My heart jumped. I quickly gathered the files, hid them under the table, and went out, forcing a smile. It was an American couple, blonde, with radiant smiles, looking for souvenirs. I showed them some embroidered napkins. I told them about each stitch, but my mind was still in the back room where Mark's secrets lay. When they left with a bright red rug under their arm, I went back to Frank. My heart was still pounding from the fear that Sarah might have seen something. I didn't want her to know. I didn't want to burden her with more weight. Frank sat down, took out a cigarette, lit it, and took a long drag. The smoke floated in the air, mixing with the smell of beeswax from the rugs. "I'm going to prepare an anonymous complaint," he said slowly. "It will be sent directly to the Department of Public Works and the IRS. But to be sure, we need a witness from the inside. Someone who knows exactly what's going on in Mark's company." I immediately thought of Carmen, Sarah's best friend, who had worked as an accountant at Carter Construction since the company was founded. Carmen had come to my shop, had sat down to eat pastries, and had told me about her hard times. If there was anyone who would dare to stand up to Mark, it could only be Carmen. "Carmen," I said with a confident voice, "she's Sarah's best friend. She knows a lot about his company." Frank nodded. His eyes lit up. "If she agrees to cooperate, we'll have another fatal arrow," he said with a determined voice. "But you have to convince her, Linda, it's not easy. She might be scared, she might refuse." I nodded, knowing this path would not be easy, but I had no other choice. At that moment, Leo ran in from the street holding up a colored pencil drawing. He was beaming, his face lit up like the Santa Fe sun. "Grandma, look, I drew our house," he boasted in his clear voice. I bent down and looked at the drawing. A small house, a mother and a child holding hands under the shade of an avocado tree. "My daddy isn't there," Leo added with the innocence of someone stating the obvious. A lump formed in my throat as if someone was squeezing my heart. I looked at Frank and saw him place a hand on my shoulder with a resolute look. "That's exactly why you have to see this through, Linda," he said, his voice low but firm. "Not just for Sarah, but for this child." I hugged Leo, feeling the warmth of his small body. His drawing wasn't just scribbles, it was a reminder of why I was fighting. I looked at Frank, nodded, and inside me, a fire ignited stronger than ever. Mark might think he controlled everything, but he didn't know that I had found an ally, and that I wouldn't stop until he paid for what he had done to my daughter and my grandson. One afternoon, Frank met me at a small taco shop in Albuquerque, where the smell of grilled meat mixed with the sizzle of charcoal. I sat across from him, my hands gripping the edge of the worn wooden table, trying not to tremble. Frank didn't say much, just placed a thick yellowish craft paper envelope on the table. "These are copies of the documents I already sent," he said, his voice low and confident. "The game has begun, Linda." I looked at the envelope, my heart pounding as if it wanted to burst out of my chest. Outside the streets of Albuquerque were still bustling a street vendor calling out, "Tamales, get your hot tamales." His voice echoed, but I only heard the beating of my heart. Everything outside was normal, but I knew an underground storm was brewing, and I was the one who had started it. I didn't dare open the envelope in the taco shop. I feared curious glances. I was afraid someone would see me and tell Mark. I put the envelope in my cloth bag and held it tightly throughout the bus ride back to Santa Fe. That night in my small room, when Sarah and Leo were already asleep, I opened the envelope by the flickering light of a candle. The papers inside were the proof, the falsified contracts, the money laundering receipts, the bribery notes, all like bullets ready to take Mark down. I read every line, my hands shaking, feeling a mixture of joy and fear. Joy because I finally had something to confront him with, and fear because I knew this path would be more dangerous than I imagined. 3 days later, the first rumors appeared. I was cleaning the shop when I heard Mrs. Davis, my neighbor, whisper to a customer, "They say the Carter Construction Company is involved in a huge embezzlement. Someone posted photos of the invoices online. The whole town is talking about it." I pretended to be busy rearranging some skeins of yarn, but my heart was pounding. I discreetly opened my phone and searched for an anonymous social media account. The images of the suspicious invoices, the fraudulent figures of the Carter Company, appeared clearly. I immediately recognized the documents Frank had shown me. He had acted, and the storm I was expecting had already begun to rise. The next morning, Sarah ran into the shop, her face pale and her phone in her hand. "Mom, look at this," she said, her voice alarmed. "They're saying that Mark embezzled money from the projects, that he even launders money. Is it true, Mom?" Sarah's eyes were red as if she had been crying. I took her hand, squeezed it tightly, and tried to make my voice sound calm. "You just worry about Leo," I told her, although I knew the truth. "Everything is going to be fine." But looking into her eyes, I saw a mixture of fear and hope. She didn't ask any more questions. She just nodded. But I knew she was holding back, trying to protect Leo from what was happening. In the Santa Fe market, the atmosphere began to change. The vendors whom I had known for decades began to whisper. "They say Linda's son-in-law not only hits his wife, but he's also corrupt," a vegetable seller whispered as I passed by her stall. I pretended not to hear. I bent down to choose some potatoes, but my heart was beating like a war drum. I didn't know whether to feel pride or fear. Pride because Mark's secrets were coming to light, and fear because I knew he wouldn't just stand by. He would seek revenge, and I was afraid that Sarah and Leo would be the ones to pay the price. A week later, while I was dusting a shelf, a young woman entered the shop. She was wearing a white blouse, her hair pulled back in a high bun, and a microphone in her hand, followed by a man with a camera. "Mrs. Ramirez," the young woman said, her voice soft but incisive. "I'm Anna Mendez, a reporter for the Albuquerque television channel. There are rumors that your son-in-law commits domestic violence. Could you confirm this?" I looked at the young woman and then directly into the camera lens. For a moment, I wanted to tell everything, that Mark not only beat my daughter, but was a corrupt man, a destroyer of families. But then I remembered Sarah, her pleading gaze, Leo playing in a corner of the shop. I said nothing, just looked at the camera for a few seconds, nodded, and turned away in silence. My silence, I knew, was a confession. That night, I sat with Sarah and Leo in my small room. The local news was on the old television, the anchor's voice echoing. The Carter Company faces accusations of financial fraud and domestic violence. The image of my shop appeared on the screen, along with headlines about the accusations against Mark. Sarah turned pale. She hugged Leo tightly, her eyes filled with tears. "Mom, what's happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. I sighed and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I don't know where all this will lead," I said, although in my heart I knew very well. "But I promise you, I will protect you and Leo." Those words were not just a promise to Sarah, but to myself. That night, the sky over Santa Fe was heavy, without a single star. I had just folded the last rug, preparing to close the shop, when the blinding lights of a truck cut through the darkness, aimed directly at my face. The engine roared like a threat, and I immediately recognized Mark's familiar black vehicle. My heart pounded not with fear, but because I knew this moment would come sooner or later. I stood tall, my hands gripping the edge of a wooden table, trying not to tremble. After the rumors and the articles about Carter Construction, I knew he wouldn't stay quiet. Mark got out of the truck, his shirt wrinkled, his hair disheveled, and his eyes bloodshot like a cornered beast. He slammed the door shut, the sound echoing in the small alley, making some nearby dogs bark frantically. "You're behind all this, aren't you, old woman?" he shouted, his voice hoarse and full of rage. "All that dirty news, you started it." His words were like a stab, but I didn't flinch. I had already faced him once in his office, and this time in front of my own shop, I wouldn't let him see me as weak. Before I could answer, Sarah ran out of the house, her face pale and her eyes filled with panic. "Mark, don't make a scene here," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "Leo is inside." I saw the fear in my daughter's eyes, the way she clung to the doorframe, as if trying to prevent the world from collapsing. I gently pushed Sarah back inside and whispered, "Go inside, honey, I'll handle this." She shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks, but I looked at her firmly, and she finally backed away, hugging the doorframe as if it were her only support. I went out and faced Mark. He was there, tall and arrogant, but I could see the panic in his eyes. The rumors and articles had made him lose control, and I knew it was time to be stronger than ever. I took a deep breath and said slowly but firmly, "It wasn't me, Mark. It was justice. You thought you could hide the truth in plain sight, but the truth always finds a way out." My words came out clearly, like every stitch I embroidered on my napkins, sharp and irrevocable. He roared and moved closer, just an arm's length away. "You're going to regret this," he shouted, his voice trembling with rage. "I'm going to make you lose this shop, lose all your honor in this town." His threat was like an icy wind, but I stood firm, not backing down. I thought of Sarah, of the bruises on her arm, of Leo's drawing without a father figure. "You lost your honor a long time ago, Mark," I said with a glacial calm, "and I'm just an old woman who sells crafts, but I won't let you keep hurting my daughter." The neighbors started peeking out of their windows, the lights of nearby houses illuminating the alley. I saw some of them raise their phones recording the scene. Mark noticed. His gaze swept over the crowd, and I saw the panic in it. He cursed. He turned furiously towards his truck and slammed the door shut. The tires screeched on the cobblestones as he sped away, leaving a strong smell of exhaust and a tense air. I stood there, watching the truck disappear into the distance, feeling a relief mixed with a heavy worry. He was losing control, but I knew he was still dangerous. Sarah collapsed in the doorway, covering her face with her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Her crying broke my heart. I knelt down, helped her up, and hugged her tightly. "You have to be strong," I told her in a low voice, although I was holding back tears myself. "This is just the beginning, Sarah. I won't let him win." She nodded, but I felt her body tremble, as if she were in the middle of a storm without knowing where to go. When Sarah went inside to hug Leo, who was fast asleep, I stayed at the door looking at the night sky. Dark clouds covered the moon, but I saw a figure standing under the light of a distant street lamp. It was Frank. He approached, his eyes sharp, but with a glimmer of satisfaction. "Well done, Linda," he whispered. "He's losing control. The angrier he gets, the more mistakes he'll make." I nodded without saying anything, but in my heart I knew one thing for sure. The real storm was about to break, and I was ready to face it. After the night Mark came to make a scene in front of the shop, I couldn't sleep a wink. The wind whistled through the cracks of the old wooden door, a dog barked in the distance, and my own heart was beating so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest. The next morning, as the first rays of sun appeared, Frank knocked on the door. He came in with a small USB drive and a thick stack of documents in his hand, his face serious, but with a spark of determination in his eyes. I invited him to sit, served him a cup of black coffee, but my hands were shaking so much that I spilled a few drops on the table. Frank didn't mind. He put the drive and the documents on the table and said slowly, "These are the final proofs, Linda. The fake contracts, the bank accounts, and the names of Mark's relatives, and the shady transactions he thought no one would discover. With this, he has no escape." I looked at the stack of documents, the numbers, the signatures, and the scribbled notes, as if they were daggers piercing my heart. This was not just proof of corruption, but the truth about who Mark was, a man who not only hurt my daughter, but ruined many others to satisfy his greed. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. Frank smiled ironically, but also with confidence. "We'll make him dig his own grave," he said with a cold look. "He'll have to face the truth, not before you, but before the whole world." That afternoon, while I was cleaning the shop, the phone rang. Mark's number appeared on the screen, and I felt my heart stop. I took a deep breath and answered. His voice sounded hoarse, with no trace of his previous arrogance. "What do you want? Just say it. Money. An apology. I'll do whatever it takes. Just stop this." I heard the desperation in his voice, but it didn't soften me. I thought of the bruises on Sarah's arm, of Leo's scared look, of the nights I prayed at Michael's altar. "I want the truth," I replied, my voice firm. "You're going to confess everything, not to me, but in front of everyone." I hung up before he could say anything else, my heart pounding, but feeling a great relief, as if a huge stone had been lifted from my chest. That night, Frank and I met with Ana Mendez, the reporter who had come to my shop in a small bar on the outskirts of Santa Fe. The place was almost empty. Only soft mariachi music could be heard, and it smelled of beer. Ana was sitting in a corner, her hair pulled back, a recorder in her hand, and a look that was both curious and cautious. I gave her the entire file Frank had prepared, each page like a piece of the truth about Mark. She reviewed it, glancing at each document, and then sighed, saying in a low voice, "If I publish this, the whole town will be shaken, Linda. Are you sure you want to go through with this?" I looked her straight in the eye without hesitation. "I've come too far to stop now," I said. "My daughter deserves to be free, and this truth has to come out." The next morning I woke up early, made coffee, but couldn't take a sip. I turned on the television, and the Albuquerque channel was broadcasting a special live news report. Mark Carter was sitting in the middle of a press conference, his face pale, sweating at the temples, his usual suit now looking wrinkled. In front of dozens of cameras, he took a paper with trembling hands and read every word of a prepared statement. His voice was breaking, but every word was clear. He admitted to abusing Sarah Ramirez. He admitted that Carter Construction had financial irregularities and fraud in public contracts. And finally, he publicly apologized to his family and announced the dissolution of the company. I sat in the shop in front of the small television, my hands gripping the edge of the table. The image of Mark on the screen was that of a man laid bare before the world. I didn't feel satisfaction, only a deep sadness. He had been the man I trusted, the one I thought would bring Sarah happiness. Now he was just a shadow of himself, sunk by his own sins. The whispers of customers in the market began to be heard from outside. Mark fell apart. Who would have thought he was so violent? Now he's lost everything. I listened, but didn't respond. I just looked silently at Sarah, who was sitting next to me. She was hugging Leo tightly, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. Leo looked at his mom, confused, and then turned to me and asked, "Grandma, Daddy's not coming back, is he?" I pulled the boy towards me. Didn't answer, just stroked his head. Sarah whispered with a broken voice, I'm finally free, Mom." Her words were like a knife, painful and liberating at the same time. I hugged Sarah, feeling her thin body tremble in my arms. "I promise I'll always be here," I said in a hoarse voice. "Whatever happens, I will protect you and Leo." A few weeks after the day Mark was forced to confess on television, Sarah's life and mine began to find some peace, even if it was as fragile as a candle flame in the wind. The court resolved the case faster than I expected. One morning, Sarah and I were in the small courtroom in Santa Fe, where light streamed through the high windows illuminating the old tiled floor. The judge, a woman with a stern face, declared Sarah divorced and granted her full custody of Leo. Hearing those words, Sarah squeezed my hand, tears rolling down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of liberation. I hugged my daughter, feeling her thin body tremble in my arms. "Mom, I can't believe this day has come," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. I just held her tighter, saying nothing, because in my heart joy was mixed with the pain of the past months. Mark was banned from working in the construction sector, a severe blow to the empire he once took pride in. All his assets were frozen for investigation, and I heard he had to sell his large house in Albuquerque to pay off debts. His mother Beatrice, who used to sit arrogantly in her wicker chair criticizing my daughter, had left town quietly. One afternoon, Mrs. Davis told me she had been seen at the bus station with a single old suitcase as luggage, her face gaunt with no trace of her former pride. I didn't feel satisfaction, just a vague sadness. She had been the mother of the man I trusted to protect Sarah. But now she too was just part of a painful past. Detective Miller and the lawyer Stevens didn't escape this storm either. The press reported that federal authorities had opened an investigation, and images of both men being escorted away, their faces distraught, appeared in all the local newspapers. I saw those photos in the shop when a customer forgot his newspaper on a table. Miller, who had mocked me when I begged for justice, now had his head bowed and his wrists handcuffed. Stevens, with his gleaming gold ring, now looked like a defeated man. I didn't smile, I didn't say anything. I just folded the newspaper in silence. Justice, though late, had finally found its way. With Frank's silent help, Sarah found a new job at a prestigious accounting firm in Santa Fe. The day she received the offer letter, she ran to the shop and hugged me with shining eyes. "Mom, they hired me," she said, her voice full of emotion, as if a part of the old Sarah, the young woman full of dreams, was returning. I hugged her, tears rolling down my cheeks, but this time they were tears of happiness. "You make me so proud," I told her, although a lump formed in my throat. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy for Sarah, but she had a new beginning, a chance to rebuild her life and Leo's. I returned to my quiet life in the artisan shop. Every morning I opened the door, arranged the skeins of yarn-wove rugs, and chatted with customers as before. But now I had Leo by my side. The boy used to run to the shop after school with his scribbled drawings and a radiant smile. One afternoon I taught Leo how to make his first stitches on a small piece of fabric. He held the needle awkwardly, the stitches crooked, but he laughed out loud and said, "Grandma, when I grow up, I'm going to draw more colors on your napkins." His innocent words were like a fresh breeze dispelling the heavy days. I stroked his head and smiled. "If you embroider better than me, I'll leave you the whole shop." Leo laughed heartily, and at that moment I felt my heart lighter than ever. One afternoon, while I was hanging a newly woven rug at the entrance of the shop, Anna Mendez passed by. She was wearing a white blouse, her hair pulled back, and the same radiant smile as the first time I saw her. She waved at me, and I nodded, smiling in gratitude. Her report, along with the evidence Frank and I provided, had brought the truth to light, had helped Sarah break free from Mark's chains. I didn't say anything, but inside I was grateful to her and to Frank, the people who stood by my side in this fight. At night, I returned to my small room where the candle flame in front of Michael's altar was still flickering. I lit an incense stick, the copal scent spreading, bringing a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I looked at Michael's kind eyes in the photo and whispered, "Justice may take time, but it finally came, my love, and no one has the right to trample on our daughter's dignity." I closed my eyes, feeling the soft night breeze move the curtain. This war was over, and we had won, not with violence, but with perseverance and a love that never gave up. I sat there in my small room, listening to the chirping of the crickets in the alley. I thought of Sarah, of the smile returning to her face. I thought of Leo, of the colorful drawings he would paint in his future. And I thought of myself, an old woman who sold crafts, who had dared to confront an entire system to protect her family. I was no longer afraid. I had no more doubts. This life, though hard, had taught me that a mother's love can be stronger than any power. And with that love, I knew we would move forward together under the Santa Fe sun. The story you have just heard has been modified in names and places to protect the identity of the people involved. We do not tell this to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes? I really wonder. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to remain silent to keep the peace, or would you dare to face it all to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story is like a candle that can light someone else's path. God always blesses, and I am convinced that courage leads us to better days. Meanwhile, on the end screen, I leave you two of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until this moment.